Ji-yoon sat on her couch on a quiet Tuesday afternoon when her phone buzzed. The message that appeared on her screen was brief but devastating. Her husband had left her for another woman. Her hands trembled as she read the words repeatedly, trying to process their meaning. The apartment suddenly felt too small, too suffocating, filled with memories that now seemed to mock her. And if you want a handsome CEO in your life and love videos like this, subscribe to our channel to have 10 years of luck in your life. She stood up mechanically, her body moving on autopilot as her mind struggled to cope with this new reality. Her eyes landed on their wedding photo mounted prominently on the living room wall. Without thinking, she walked over and took it down, her fingers tracing the frame's edges. The happiness captured in that moment felt like a cruel joke now. The sound of glass shattering echoed through the room as the frame hit the floor. This act unleashed something within her. Ji-yoon moved through their shared space like a whirlwind, gathering everything that reminded her of him. Birthday cards, vacation souvenirs, the matching coffee mugs they bought during their honeymoon. All of it went into a pile in the middle of the living room. Each item carried a memory that now felt tainted, corrupted by the knowledge of his betrayal. The destruction wasn't loud or dramatic. Instead, it was methodical, almost quiet. She tore photographs in half, with precise movements. She deleted digital photos from her phone, watching as years of memories disappeared with each tap of her finger. The wedding ring came off last, placed deliberately on top of the pile of discarded memories. As the adrenaline faded, Ji-yoon found herself sitting on the floor, surrounded by the debris of her married life. The afternoon light streaming through the windows illuminated dust particles dancing in the air, and she realized she'd been at this for hours. The physical act of destroying these connections to her past had left her exhausted, but her mind wouldn't stop replaying memories. She remembered their first date at a small coffee shop near her office, how he'd been so nervous he knocked over his Americano. The time they got caught in the rain during a weekend trip to Busan, seeking shelter in a tiny seafood restaurant where they ended up having one of their most memorable meals. The way he used to bring her favorite pastries every Sunday morning, a tradition that had slowly faded away over the past year, a warning sign she'd chosen to ignore. The sound of a key turning in the lock broke through her thoughts. Her grandmother, who had a spare key for emergencies, stepped into the apartment. The older woman took in the scene, the scattered debris, her granddaughter sitting amid the chaos, tears streaming down her face, and didn't say a word. Instead, she carefully made her way through the mess and sat down next to Ji-yoon, wrapping her arms around her granddaughter's shoulders. They sat in silence as Ji-yoon's tears continued to fall. Her grandmother's presence was steady, grounding, offering comfort without demanding explanations. The familiar scent of her grandmother's perfume mixed with the subtle hint of the kimchi she always made reminded Ji-yoon of simpler times, of childhood summers spent in her grandmother's kitchen learning family recipes. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the room, her grandmother finally spoke. She didn't offer empty platitudes about time healing all wounds or suggest that everything happens for a reason. Instead, she reminded Ji-yoon of who she was before she became someone's wife. She spoke of a little girl who used to draw elaborate designs on any surface she could find, who dreamed of creating beautiful spaces that would make people feel at home. "Do you remember," her grandmother asked, "how you used to rearrange my furniture every time you visited? You said each room needed to tell its own story." Her voice was so FT but clear, carrying the weight of years of wisdom. "Your story isn't over, Ji-yoon. This is just one chapter ending." Ji-yoon listened as her grandmother continued to speak, not about moving on or finding someone new, but about rediscovering herself. The older woman's words planted a seed of possibility in Ji-yoon's mind, suggesting that perhaps this ending, as painful as it was, could lead to a new beginning. As night fell, her grandmother helped her clean up the physical remnants of her marriage. They worked together in comfortable silence, gathering broken frames and torn photographs. Each piece they picked up felt lighter than when Ji-yoon had thrown it down, as if the act of cleaning was itself a form of healing. 3 weeks after receiving the text message that ended her marriage, Ji-yoon stood outside the Seoul Arts Center. The local art fair had been her grandmother's suggestion, a gentle push to leave the apartment where she'd been isolating herself. The morning air was crisp, and Ji-yoon adjusted her scarf as she watched people stream into the building. She hadn't planned to come, but after another sleepless night, she decided that anything was better than staring at her newly rearranged furniture. The exhibition space buzzed with quiet energy. Ji-yoon moved through the galleries methodically, studying each piece without really seeing them. She found herself standing before a large abstract painting, its swirling blues and grays reminiscent of a storm at sea. For the first time in weeks, something caught her attention fully. The chaos on the canvas reflected her internal turmoil, yet there was something oddly soothing about the composition. The artist painted this after losing everything in a fire, a deep voice said beside her. She said it helped her process the destruction and find beauty in starting over. Ji-yoon turned to find a man in his mid-30s standing next to her. He wore a well-tailored gray suit that suggested corporate success, but his relaxed posture and the way he studied the painting indicated genuine interest rather than mere investment potential. His name tag identified him as Minho Kim, CEO of a development company she vaguely recognized. "How do you know that?" she asked, surprised to find herself engaging in conversation with a stranger. "I interviewed her for a project last year," Minho replied, his eyes still on the painting. "We were commissioning pieces for a new building, and her story stuck with me. Sometimes the most powerful art comes from our darkest moments." Ji-yoon nodded, unable to disagree. The painting seemed to shift before her eyes, the storm becoming less threatening and more transformative. She realized she'd been standing there longer than she'd intended, but Minho's presence didn't feel intrusive. He had a calm energy that seemed to create a bubble of tranquility in the bustling gallery. "Would you like to get coffee?" Minho asked suddenly, turning to face her. "There's a cafe on the 3rd floor with an excellent view of the sculpture garden. I'd enjoy hearing your thoughts on the exhibition." Ji-yoon's first instinct was to decline. She hadn't planned on socializing. The art fair was supposed to be a brief venture out of her self-imposed isolation. But something in Minho's expression, a mixture of genuine interest and gentle understanding, made her hesitate. "I'm Minho," he said, extending his hand. "And I promise the cafe has the best green tea latte in Seoul." "Ji-yoon," she replied, accepting his handshake. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. Sometimes the best things in life come from unexpected moments of courage. "I prefer Americano, though." The cafe was quieter than the exhibition space, with floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the room with natural light. They found a table near the window, and Ji-yoon noticed how Minho chose the seat that would put her at ease, giving her both a view of the garden and a clear path to the exit. It was a small duration, but one that didn't go unnoticed. Their conversation started with art, but soon meandered into other topics. Minho spoke about architecture and his belief in creating spaces that enhanced people's lives. His passion for his work was evident in the way he described his latest project, converting an old factory into a community arts center. "Every building has a story," he explained, stirring his coffee. "The challenge is finding ways to honor that history while creating something new and meaningful." Ji-yoon found herself relaxing as they talked. Minho had an easy way of maintaining conversation without pushing for personal details. He shared stories about his own work challenges and small victories, creating a comfortable space for dialogue without expectations. The afternoon light had begun to fade when they finally noticed how much time had passed. Ji-yoon realized with surprise that this was the first time in weeks she hadn't been constantly aware of her pain. The conversation with Minho had given her a few hours of genuine peace. As they prepared to leave, Minho reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. "I enjoyed our conversation, Ji-yoon," he said, holding out the card. "If you'd ever like to continue our discussion about art and architecture, or if you're interested in seeing how we're transforming that old factory, please don't hesitate to call." Ji-yoon accepted the card, noting the weight of the paper and the minimalist design. It felt like a bridge being extended, not a demand or an expectation, but a possibility. For the first time since receiving that devastating text message, she felt a spark of something that might have been hope. Walking home in the early evening, Ji-yoon realized she felt lighter. The unexpected encounter with Minho hadn't erased her pain or magically solved her problems, but it had shown her that perhaps her grandmother was right. Maybe new beginnings could come in unexpected forms, and maybe she was stronger than she thought. She carefully placed Minho's business card in her wallet, not yet sure if she would use it, but feeling comforted by its presence. The day had begun as an obligation, a concession to her grandmother's worried looks, but had transformed into something else entirely. As she walked, she found herself thinking about the painting of the storm, about transformation, and about the possibility that sometimes the end of one thing could lead to the beginning of another. The cafe meeting with Minho extended into a longer conversation than either of them had anticipated. As they sat across from each other, Minho began sharing his own journey in the corporate world. He spoke about the challenges he faced early in his career, including a failed startup that taught him valuable lessons about resilience and adaptation. Ji-yoon found herself drawn into his narrative, particularly when he described his own period of self-doubt. Everyone sees the success, he explained, his fingers wrapped around his coffee cup, but few understand the failures that preceded it. I had to learn that setbacks don't define us, they refine us. The conversation shifted when Minho inquired about her background. Ji-yoon hesitated before mentioning her career as a designer. Her voice grew quieter as she explained how she had gradually set aside her creative ambitions during her marriage, focusing instead on more practical pursuits. The admission felt both painful and liberating. Minho leaned forward, his interest evident. "What kind of design work did you do?" he asked, his question opening a door she hadn't walked through in years. Ji-yoon found herself describing her earlier projects, the boutique hotel lobby she'd redesigned fresh out of university, the restaurant interior that had won a local design award. As she spoke, her hands moved animatedly, sketching invisible designs in the air. The passion she'd buried began to resurface, her words flowing more freely with each proj. "ECT," she described. "I specialized in creating spaces that tell stories," she explained, surprising herself with the strength in her voice. Every room should evoke an emotional response, create a connection with the people who enter it. Minho listened intently, occasionally asking questions that demonstrated his understanding of design principles. Then, almost casually, he mentioned the hotel renovation project his company had recently undertaken. "We're struggling to find the right designer," he said. "Someone who understands that a hotel isn't just about luxury, it's about creating experiences, memories." Ji-yoon felt her heart rate increase. She recognized the opportunity being presented, and it both excited and terrified her. The project would be her first major undertaking in years, a chance to prove to herself that her skills hadn't diminished. "The original building has a fascinating history," Minho continued, pulling out his tablet to show her some preliminary photographs. "It was one of the first Western-style hotels in Seoul, built in the 1960s. We want to honor that heritage while creating something contemporary." As they looked through the images together, Ji-yoon's designer instincts kicked in. She found herself making mental notes about the space's potential, seeing possibilities in the high ceilings and large windows. When Minho asked for her initial thoughts, she surprised herself by offering several concrete suggestions about lighting and flow. The conversation became more technical as they discussed potential approaches to the renovation. Minho shared the project's constraints and goals, while Ji-yoon offered insights about materials and spatial dynamics. Their exchange had the easy flow of two professionals speaking the same language. As their meeting drew to a close, Minho made the offer official. "I'd like you to consider joining this project as our lead designer," he said, his tone professional but warm. "Take some time to think about it. The commitment would be significant, but I believe your vision aligns perfectly with what we're trying to achieve." Ji-yoon felt a mixture of emotions wash over her. The opportunity was exactly what she needed, a chance to reconnect with her passion for design, to prove her capabilities, to rebuild her professional confidence. Yet fear lingered at the edges of her consciousness, whispering doubts about her readiness to take on such a significant project. Minho seemed to sense her hesitation. "You don't have to decide now," he assured her. "Review the project details, visit the site if you'd like. The position is yours if you want it, but I understand if you need time to consider." As they parted ways, Ji-yoon clutched the project folder Minho had given her. The weight of the opportunity felt tangible in her hands. Walking home, she found herself looking at buildings differently, noticing details she hadn't paid attention to in years. Her designer's eye was awakening, seeing possibilities where before she had only seen structures. That evening, sitting in her apartment, Ji-yoon spread the project documents across her dining table. For the first time in weeks, her mind wasn't focused on her failed marriage, but on the potential of creating something new. She picked up a pencil and, almost without thinking, began sketching ideas in the margins of the papers. The simple act of drawing, something she hadn't done in months, felt like coming home. Each line she drew seemed to reconnect her with a part of herself she'd forgotten, rebuilding bridges to her own creativity that she'd allowed to crumble. After receiving Minho's job offer, Ji-yoon spent several days in deep contemplation. She found herself standing in front of her grandmother's door one morning, seeking the wisdom that had guided her through her darkest moments. Her grandmother listened intently as Ji-yoon explained the opportunity, her eyes twinkling with understanding. Sometimes, her grandmother said, pouring tea into delicate cups, the universe has a way of offering exactly what we need when we're ready to receive it. She encouraged Ji-yoon to embrace the opportunity, reminding her that growth often requires stepping into uncertainty. Motivated by her grandmother's support, Ji-yoon called Minho and accepted the position. The excitement in his voice matched her own growing enthusiasm, and they scheduled their first official project meeting for the following week. For the first time in months, Ji-yoon felt a sense of purpose returning to her life. However, the universe had other plans for testing her resolve. That evening, an unexpected knock at her door revealed Dong-wook, her friend of 15 years. He stood in her doorway, with concern etched across his familiar features, holding a bag of her favorite comfort food, sweet potato pizza from the place they'd frequented since college. "I heard about the new job," he said, stepping into her apartment. His tone carried an undercurrent of worry that Ji-yoon immediately recognized. Dong-wook had been her constant support throughout her marriage and subsequent divorce, the friend who had helped her move out and who had spent countless hours listening to her pain. As they sat at her small dining table, Dong-wook began expressing his concerns about Minho and the project. "I've done some research on him," he admitted, picking at his pizza slice. "His company has a reputation for being demanding, and the hours are intense. After everything you've been through, is this really the best time to take on such a huge commitment?" Ji-yoon felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the sensation of being pulled between different expectations and loyalties. Dong-wook's concerns weren't entirely unfounded. She was still healing, still rebuilding her life. Yet something about his protective stance made her feel smothered rather than supported. "I've checked his company too," she responded, trying to keep her voice steady. "Their projects are innovative, and their design team has won several awards. This could be exactly what I need to restart my career." Dong-wook leaned forward, his expression serious. "I just don't want to see you get hurt again," he said softly. "You're finally starting to seem like yourself again, and I worry this might be too much, too soon." The weight of his words hung in the air between them. Ji-yoon recognized the care behind his concern, but she also felt a growing frustration. Her friend's protective instincts, while well-intentioned, seemed to cast her as fragile, broken, someone to be sheltered rather than supported. "I appreciate your concern," she finally said, choosing her words carefully. "But I need to make this decision for myself. I can't let fear of getting hurt stop me from moving forward." The conversation continued late into the evening, with Dong-wook sharing more specific concerns about Minho's business practices and the pressure she might face. Each point he raised planted small seeds of doubt in Ji-yoon's mind, despite her determination to remain confident in her decision. That night, after Dong-wook left, Ji-yoon sat alone in her living room, feeling the weight of expectations pressing in from all sides. Her grandmother's encouragement pulled her forward while Dong-wook's concerns held her back. Somewhere in between lay her own desires and fears, tangled together like threads in a complex tapestry. She found herself thinking about Minho, his quiet confidence, the way he spoke about design with genuine passion, how he seemed to see her potential rather than her past. Yet Dongwook's words echoed in her mind, reminding her of how wrong she'd been about people before. The pressure began building in her chest, a familiar anxiety that threatened to overwhelm her. Ji-yoon forced herself to take deep breaths, remembering the techniques her therapist had taught her. She walked to her window, looking out at the city lights twinkling in the distance. The view reminded her of something Minho had said about architecture, how every building tells a story, but those stories can be rewritten, reimagined. Perhaps the same was true for people. Her past experiences had shaped her, but they didn't have to define her future choices. As she prepared for bed that night, Ji-yoon made a decision. She would proceed with the project, but she would do so with careful consideration of both her capabilities and her limitations. She would set clear boundaries and maintain her independence while allowing herself to explore this new opportunity. Yet as she drifted off to sleep, the competing voices of her grandmother, Dongwook, and her own inner doubts continued to swirl in her mind, creating a symphony of uncertainty that would follow her into her dreams. Copyright try I'll continue edit I'll now develop topic 5. Crescimento pestle, personal growth, maintaining our direct style. On her therapist's recommendation, Ji-yoon started keeping a journal to track her emotional progress. The leather-bound notebook sat open on her desk during her weekly therapy sessions, its pages gradually filling with insights and revelations. Dr. Park, her therapist, had created a safe space where Ji-yoon could explore her feelings without judgment. During one particularly significant session, Dr. Park addressed Ji-yoon's tendency to blame herself for her failed marriage. "When someone betrays our trust," she explained, leaning forward in her chair, "we often search for ways we could have prevented it. But sometimes, the answer isn't in what we did or didn't do. It's in accepting that we can't control others' choices." This simple truth hit Ji-yoon with unexpected force. She had spent months analyzing every decision, every argument, every moment of their marriage, searching for the point where she could have changed the outcome. Dr. Park helped her understand that this self-blame was a way of trying to maintain the illusion of control. Their sessions began to focus on rebuilding Ji-yoon's sense of self-worth. Dr. Park introduced exercises designed to help Ji-yoon recognize her own value outside of her relationships. They worked on identifying patterns in her past relationships, both romantic and platonic, where she had compromised her own needs to maintain harmony. Healthy love, Dr. Park emphasized during one session, doesn't require you to become smaller. It should give you room to grow. She helped Ji-yoon understand how her marriage had gradually eroded her confidence, leading her to abandon her professional aspirations and personal interests. The therapy sessions also addressed Ji-yoon's relationship with Dongwook. Dr. Park helped her recognize the complex dynamics at play, how his protective behavior, while coming from a place of care, sometimes reinforced her fears rather than helping her overcome them. They discussed the importance of setting boundaries, even with people who mean well. As weeks passed, Ji-yoon began implementing small changes in her daily life. She returned to her morning yoga practice, something she had given up during her marriage. She reconnected with old college friends who shared her passion for design. Each small step forward built her confidence incrementally. The project with Minho's company became a practical testing ground for her newfound insights. In their meetings, she practiced expressing her ideas clearly and standing firm when she believed in her design choices. When doubts crept in, she used the grounding techniques Dr. Park had taught her to stay focused on the present moment rather than getting lost in anxious thoughts about the future. During one session, Dr. Park asked Ji-yoon to describe how she envisioned love now, compared to before her marriage. Ji-yoon thought carefully before responding. "Before, I thought love meant finding someone to complete me," she said slowly. "Now I understand that real love should start from a place of wholeness, two complete people choosing to share their lives." His realization marked a turning point in Ji-yoon's therapy journey. She began to see her divorce not as a failure, but as an opportunity for growth and self-discovery. Dr. Park helped her understand that pain, while uncomfortable, often serves as a catalyst for profound personal transformation. They also discussed Ji-yoon's growing feelings for Minho, approaching the topic with careful consideration. Dr. Park encouraged Jiyoon to proceed at her own pace, reminding her that healing isn't linear and that it's okay to feel both excited and scared about new possibilities. Think of it like designing a room, Dr. Park suggested, using Jiyoon's professional background as a metaphor. You wouldn't start furnishing before ensuring the foundation is solid. The same applies to building new relationships, whether professional or personal. As their sessions continued, Jiyoon found herself better equipped to handle the complexities of her new life. She developed strategies for managing anxiety, learned to recognize and challenge negative thought patterns, and began to trust her own judgment more fully. The most significant change came in how Jiyoon viewed herself. Through therapy, she rediscovered her passion for design, not just as a career, but as a form of self-expression. She began seeing her sensitivity, something she had previously viewed as a weakness, as a strength that enhanced her ability to create spaces that resonated with people. Dr. Park helped her understand that growth often feels uncomfortable because it pushes us beyond our familiar boundaries. Each time Jiyoon faced a new challenge in her professional or personal life, she returned to the tools and insights gained in therapy, building resilience through practice and persistence. This period of introspection and healing wasn't just about recovering from her divorce. It was about discovering who Jiyoon could become when she finally gave herself permission to grow beyond the limitations she had accepted for so long. The hotel renovation project created natural opportunities for Jiyoon and Minho to work closely together. Their initial meetings, focused purely on business, gradually developed a rhythm of their own. They would often find themselves working late into the evening in the project office, surrounded by material samples and design sketches. Minho's approach to leadership surprised Jiyoon. Unlike the rigid corporate structure she had expected, he fostered an environment of creative collaboration. During one particularly challenging design review, when the team struggled with the hotel lobby concept, Minho gathered everyone around the conference table and encouraged them to share their wildest ideas without judgment. The chemistry between them developed subtly through these professional interactions. Jiyoon noticed how Minho always seemed to anticipate her needs during presentations, having the right reference materials ready before she asked. He valued her input, often seeking her opinion on matters beyond her immediate scope of work. Their first moment of personal connection came during a site visit to the hotel. As they walked through the empty building, Minho shared stories about its history, how it had hosted diplomatic meetings in the 1970s, how couples had celebrated their weddings in its ballroom, how it had been a symbol of Seoul's modernization. His enthusiasm for preserving these memories while creating new ones revealed a sensitivity that resonated with Jiyoon's own approach to design. "Every scratch on these walls has a story," he said, running his hand along the faded wallpaper. "Our job isn't just to make it beautiful again, but to honor the lives that passed through here." The long hours and shared vision began creating moments of unexpected intimacy. They developed inside jokes about the peculiarities of various contractors, and Minho learned to read Jiyoon's expressions well enough to know when she needed coffee without asking. These small gestures of understanding built a foundation of trust between them. One evening, after a particularly successful presentation to the board, Minho suggested they take a walk through the city. Seoul's nighttime landscape spread before them as they strolled through quiet streets, their conversation flowing easily from work to personal interests. Minho spoke about his love for traditional architecture and his dreams of bridging the gap between preservation and progress. Jiyoon found herself sharing more personal stories as well, including her childhood memories of drawing building designs in her grandmother's recipe book. Minho listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he was truly engaging with her experiences rather than just being polite. The city lights created a gentle ambience as they walked, their shoulders occasionally brushing. Neither acknowledged these brief contacts, but each touch sent a small current of awareness through Jiyoon. She noticed how Minho would instinctively step closer when they crossed busy streets, his hand hovering near her elbow protectively. Their professional relationship began showing signs of something deeper in subtle ways. Minho started bringing her favorite type of tea to morning meetings. Jiyoon found herself spending extra time on presentations, knowing his eye for detail would appreciate the effort. Their colleagues noticed the change in dynamics but maintained a respectful distance, though knowing glances were occasionally exchanged when the two spent longer than necessary discussing project details. During a late-night working session, when they were the only ones left in the office, Minho finally broached the subject that had been dancing around their interactions. "I know this might complicate things," he said carefully, "but I think we both feel that there's something more here than just professional respect." Ji-yoon felt her heart rate increase at his words. The attraction she had been trying to ignore suddenly felt very real, sitting there in the quiet office with design plans spread between them. The professional part of her wanted to maintain boundaries, but another part recognized the genuine connection they had built. Their conversation that night remained honest but cautious. Both acknowledged the need to prioritize the project and maintain professional standards. Yet there was also an understanding that their connection had grown beyond the confines of their work relationship. As they left the office that evening, walking together to the parking garage, Minho asked if she would join him for dinner that weekend, not to discuss work, but simply to spend time together. The invitation hung in the air between them, representing both an opportunity and a risk. Ji-yoon found herself thinking about Dr. Park's words about healthy relationships and growth. This attraction to Minho felt different from her past experiences. It had developed gradually, built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared passion for their work. Still, the prospect of opening her heart again carried its own kind of terror. The growing connection between Ji-yoon and Minho created ripples that soon reached Dong-wook. During an unplanned visit to Ji-yoon's apartment, Dong-wook noticed subtle changes in her demeanor, the way she checked her phone more frequently, how she seemed distracted during their conversations, the new lightness in her step that he hadn't seen since before her marriage ended. One evening, as they shared their usual takeout dinner, Dong-wook finally confronted the situation. "You're falling for him, aren't you?" he asked, his voice carrying a weight that made Ji-yoon look up from her food. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken implications. Ji-yoon's silence provided the answer he feared. Dong-wook set down his chopsticks, his expression tightening. "I need to tell you something," he began, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. "I've been waiting for the right moment, but I realize now there might never be one." What followed was a confession 15 years in the making. Dong-wook revealed his feelings for Ji-yoon, explaining how he had stood by her side through college, her marriage, and her divorce, always hoping she would eventually see him as more than a friend. His words tumbled out in a rush, years of suppressed emotions finally finding their voice. "I watched you suffer through your marriage," he continued, his hands clasped tightly together. "I was there when he left, when you could barely get out of bed. I've always been here, Ji-yoon. And now you're rushing into something new with a man you barely know." The revelation struck Ji-yoon like a physical blow. Memories of their friendship replayed in her mind, taking on new meaning with this additional context. Every late-night conversation, every shoulder to cry on, every moment of support, all of it now carried a different weight. Guilt washed over her as she realized how blind she had been to his feelings. Yet beneath the guilt lay a different emotion, frustration. "Why now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why tell me this now when I'm finally starting to feel like myself again?" Dong-wook's response was immediate and passionate. He expressed his concerns about Minho, suggesting that Ji-yoon's attraction to him might be a reaction to her divorce rather than genuine feeling. He questioned whether she was truly ready for a new relationship, whether she had given herself enough time to heal. The conversation grew increasingly tense as Ji-yoon defended her ability to make her own choices. "You can't protect me from everything, Dong-wook," she said firmly. "And you can't decide when I'm ready to move forward with my life." Yet his words had struck a chord of doubt within her. In the days that followed, Ji-yoon found herself pulling back from Minho, making excuses to avoid their evening walks and keeping their interactions strictly professional. The guilt over hurting Dong-wook mixed with uncertainty about her own emotional readiness, creating a storm of conflicting feelings. Minho noticed the change in her behavior but respected her sudden need for distance, though his confused and slightly hurt expressions during meetings made her heart ache. The project continued, but the easy rapport they had developed felt strained, replaced by a formal politeness that felt foreign after their growing closeness. At home, Ji-yoon grappled with the complexity of her situation. Her friendship with Dong-wook had been a constant in her life, a source of stability during her darkest times. The thought of losing that relationship terrified her. Yet the possibility of something genuine with Minho pulled at her heart in a way she couldn't ignore. The tension began affecting her work. During design reviews, she found herself second-guessing decisions that she would have previously made confidently. The creative flow that had returned to her life began to feel blocked, constrained by the emotional turmoil she was experiencing. Each interaction with either man became weighted with unspoken words and careful distances. Dong-wook's texts, once a source of comfort, now carried an undercurrent of expectation that made her hesitate to respond. Minho's professional courtesy in their meetings felt like a step backward, a return to formality that highlighted what they might be losing. Ji-yoon felt trapped between loyalty to a friend who had always been there for her and the possibility of a new relationship that promised growth and understanding. The conflict wasn't just about choosing between two men, it was about choosing between safety and risk, between the familiar and the unknown, between gratitude and personal growth. The tension finally reached its breaking point during a project meeting. After a particularly strained discussion about design elements, where Ji-yoon and Dong-wook, who had been brought in as a consultant, disagreed openly in front of the team, Ji-yoon made a decisive choice. She needed space from both men to clear her head and focus on what she truly wanted. The confrontation with Dong-wook occurred in the parking lot after the meeting. "This has to stop," she told him firmly, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Your protectiveness isn't helping me anymore. It's suffocating me." The words felt both harsh and necessary, like removing a bandage that had been left on too long. Dong-wook's response was emotional. "Everything I've done has been because I care about you," he argued, his voice rising with frustration. "I've watched you make mistakes before, seen you get hurt. How can I just stand by and watch it happen again?" "That's exactly the problem," Ji-yoon replied, finally articulating what had been bothering her. "You're so focused on preventing me from getting hurt that you're not letting me live my life. I need to make my own choices, even if they turn out to be mistakes." The conversation ended with both of them hurt and angry. Ji-yoon drove home that night with tears streaming down her face, but feeling oddly lighter. She had finally voiced what she had been afraid to admit, that sometimes support, when it becomes too protective, can turn into a cage. Following this confrontation, Ji-yoon threw herself into her work. She requested to have project communications go through her team rather than directly through her, creating professional distance from both Minho and Dong-wook. She spent long hours in her home office, refining designs and focusing on the technical aspects of the renovation. During this period of self-imposed isolation, Ji-yoon reflected deeply on her life's direction. She remembered her grandmother's words about new beginnings and thought about what Dr. Park had said about healthy relationships. She began to understand that her hesitation wasn't just about choosing between two men, it was about choosing herself first. One evening, while reviewing old design sketches, Ji-yoon found herself drawn to a quote she had written in her notebook months ago. "Architecture is not just about buildings, it's about the space between them." The words triggered a realization. She had been so focused on the relationships in her life that she had forgotten about the importance of personal space, of room to grow. This insight led her to make a series of decisions. She started with her professional life, taking full ownership of her role in the project. She restructured her team's workflow to be more efficient and began leading meetings with renewed confidence. The hotel renovation became not just a job, but a testament to her ability to stand on her own. Her grandmother, visiting during this time, noticed the change in her. "You're starting to shine again," she observed, watching Ji-yoon work at her drafting table. "Not because of anyone else, but because you're remembering who you are." The distance she had created allowed Ji-yoon to see her relationships more clearly. She realized that Dong-wook's love, while genuine, came from a place of wanting to keep her safe in a familiar pattern. Minho's attention, in contrast, had always encouraged her growth, challenging her to expand beyond her comfort zone while respecting her boundaries. As weeks passed, Jiyoon began to understand that overcoming barriers wasn't just about pushing through them. Sometimes it meant recognizing which ones needed to be maintained. She started setting clearer boundaries in all her relationships, professional and personal. She learned to say no without guilt and to express her needs without fear. The project continued to progress, and Jiyoon's work spoke for itself. Her designs received praise from clients and colleagues alike, reinforcing her growing confidence. She noticed that as she became more assured in her professional capabilities, the emotional turmoil that had plagued her began to settle. The clarity she gained during this period helped her understand that true strength isn't about being completely independent, but about choosing healthy interdependence. She could appreciate Dongwook's friendship while acknowledging that his romantic feelings couldn't be reciprocated. She could recognize her attraction to Minho while ensuring that any potential relationship would develop on her terms, at her pace. After weeks of focusing on herself and the project, Jiyoon found herself drawn to the hotel's art gallery space one evening. The renovation was nearing completion, and the gallery walls were being prepared for their first exhibition. She didn't expect to find Minho there, standing alone in the dimly lit space, studying the empty walls with intense concentration. The moment he turned and saw her, the air between them seemed to charge with unspoken words. Neither had been alone together since she had created distance between them, and the weight of their unsaid feelings filled the empty gallery. Minho remained where he was, giving her the choice to stay or leave. Jiyoon took a deep breath and stepped forward. "I owe you an explanation," she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The gallery's acoustics carried her words clearly across the space. She explained her sudden withdrawal, talking about Dongwook's confession and her need to sort through her own feelings. Minho listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful. When she finished, he moved closer, but maintained a respectful distance. "I understood something was happening," he said softly. "I wanted to give you the space you needed to figure things out." The consideration in his response, the way he had respected her boundaries even without knowing why they were suddenly erected, confirmed what Jiyoon had come to realize during their time apart. Minho's approach to their relationship, like his approach to architecture, was about creating space for growth rather than confining it. "I've been afraid," Jiyoon admitted, her voice growing stronger as she shared her truth. "Afraid of making another mistake, afraid of hurting people I care about, afraid of losing myself in someone else again." The words echoed slightly in the empty gallery, giving them additional weight. Minho nodded, understanding evident in his expression. "Fear is natural," he responded, "but I've watched you transform this building from something broken into something beautiful. You did that by seeing its potential, not by focusing on its scars." Their conversation deepened as the evening progressed. Jiyoon shared her journey of self-discovery over the past weeks, how she had learned to distinguish between genuine support and protective constraint. Minho, in turn, spoke about his own fears of opening up to someone new, how watching her work had inspired him to be braver in his own life. They discussed their mutual attraction honestly, acknowledging both its strength and the importance of moving forward thoughtfully. Minho expressed his willingness to progress at whatever pace made Jiyoon comfortable, emphasizing that their professional relationship and her personal growth remained priorities. As they talked, they walked through the nearly completed hotel spaces they had designed together. Each room held memories of their collaboration, of moments when their creative vision had aligned perfectly. The physical transformation of the building paralleled their own emotional journey, a careful restoration that honored the past while creating space for new possibilities. The evening ended with a quiet understanding between them. No dramatic declarations or promises, just an acknowledgement of their feelings and a mutual decision to explore their connection with patience and respect. As they stood in the hotel lobby, now bathed in the warm light they had carefully designed, Jiyoon realized that true intimacy wasn't about grand gestures, but about finding someone who understood your need for both closeness and space. The decisio, and to open her heart again, didn't feel like a leap into the unknown this time. Instead, it felt like a carefully considered step forward, taken with full awareness of both the risks and the potential rewards. Minho's presence beside her, steady and supportive without being overwhelming, confirmed that she had made the right choice. Their meeting in the gallery marked not just the beginning of a potential relationship, but the culmination of Ji-yoon's journey towards self-trust. She had learned that love, when built on a foundation of mutual respect and understanding, could be a source of strength rather than vulnerability. As Ji-yoon and Minho began cautiously exploring their relationship, an unexpected revelation emerged during a company celebration for the hotel's successful renovation. The event brought together various project stakeholders, including an elderly architect named Mr. Kim, who had worked on the original building in the 1960s. During the celebration, Mr. Kim approached Minho and Ji-yoon as they stood discussing final details near the restored grand staircase. His eyes lit up with recognition when he saw Ji-yoon, though she didn't immediately understand why. What followed would reshape their understanding of their connection entirely. "You look exactly like your mother did at your age," Mr. Kim said, his voice filled with nostalgia. She and Minho's father were inseparable during the original hotel construction. Two young children running through these halls while their parents worked together. The revelation struck them both like a physical force. Minho turned to Ji-yoon, recognition dawning in his eyes. Memories long buried began surfacing. Two children playing hide-and-seek in partially constructed corridors, sharing stolen moments of adventure while their parents attended meetings, promising to be friends forever before life pulled them in different directions. Mr. Kim continued sharing details, explaining how their families had been close during the hotel's initial construction. Ji-yoon's mother had been the daughter of the lead interior designer, while Minho's father was the project architect. The children had spent countless hours together until Minho's family moved abroad for his father's work when they were both 7 years old. As Mr. Kim spoke, fragments of memories crystallized in Ji-yoon's mind. She remembered a little boy who had once promised to build her a castle, who had shared his favorite comic books with her during lunch breaks, who had cried when saying goodbye. The instant connection she had felt with Minho at the art fair suddenly made more sense. It wasn't just chemistry, but a soul recognizing its long-lost companion. Minho reached for his phone, scrolling through old family photos he had digitized years ago. There it was, a faded photograph of two children sitting on the hotel's original grand staircase, both missing their front teeth, grinning at the camera. Ji-yoon recognized herself immediately, and beside her sat a young Minho, holding up a crude architectural drawing they had made together. This discovery added a new dimension to their relationship. Their connection wasn't just about present attraction or shared professional passion. It was rooted in a shared history they had both forgotten. The hotel renovation wasn't simply another project. It was unconsciously bringing them full circle, back to where their story had first begun. As the evening progressed, they found a quiet moment to process this revelation together. Minho shared his own recovered memories, how he had asked his parents about his childhood friend for years after moving away, how he had eventually stopped asking but never quite forgot. Ji-yoon remembered the sadness of losing her first best friend, how she had drawn pictures of the castles they had imagined building together long after he left. The universe, it seemed, had orchestrated an elaborate reunion, bringing them back to the very place where their friendship had first bloomed. The hotel that had witnessed their childhood connection was now witnessing its renewal, transformed just as they had been by the passing years. This revelation brought with it a sense of rightness, of pieces falling into place. Their professional collaboration, their gradual attraction, their shared vision for the hotel's renovation, all of it felt more meaningful in light of their rediscovered connection. They weren't just building something new. They were honoring a past they had unknowingly shared. The story ended not with a dramatic declaration of love, but with a quiet acknowledgement of destiny's peculiar way of bringing lives full circle. As they stood together in the completed hotel lobby, surrounded by the beauty they had created together, Ji-yoon and Minho understood that their journey was both an ending and a beginning. They had not only restored a building, but had also uncovered a connection that had weathered time and distance to bring them back together. Their shared childhood memories became a foundation for their future, adding depth and meaning to their growing relationship. The hotel stood as a testament not just to their professional achievements, but to the enduring power of connections that run deeper than conscious memory, proving that sometimes the heart remembers what the mind forgets. The story concluded with Ji-eun and Minho walking through their beautifully restored hotel, no longer just as colleagues or potential lovers, but as two souls who had found their way back to each other through time, circumstance, and the elegant architecture of fate.